Take off your shoes and take up your cross. That's what God is asking of us on this 13th Sunday after Pentecost. The message begins with the story of Moses. He's the first and greatest prophet, the leader of the Exodus. This morning is his first commissioning scene, our first glimpse of how it is that God calls prophets. So many will follow after this one. The pattern will be the same each time. There's a need among God's people, whether they recognize that or not. God calls on someone to be a leader for this crucial time. The person says, "No, God, I'm not up to that. You need to find someone else." And here in this first commissioning, we see something else that often pertains. God will do some heroic deeds through Moses, but Moses himself is no hero. He's already committed murder and has fled Egypt in order to escape the mess he made. He's gone from living in the royal court in Egypt to tending sheep out in the back of the desert for his father-in-law. And it's here, out on the far side, we're told, on Horeb, the Mount of God, that his commissioning into God's service unfolds. We all know the story. The angel comes in a burning bush, and the bush, strangely, is not burned up. The life that is in it is somehow not being consumed. Moses, like any of us, or most of us, I imagine, goes over to see this inexplicable and utterly unexpected sight. And when he gets there, things get stranger still. A voice begins to speak to him. "Moses, Moses," says the voice that turns out to be God. And like so many prophets to follow him, Moses says, "Here I am," which always makes me want to laugh a little, as if God doesn't already know who he is or who we are when God calls us. But saying it out loud can help us get into the game, at least a little bit better. "Here I am." And God says, "Don't come any closer." Apparently, it's an awesome thing to come into the presence of the God of creation. You don't just casually walk up and have a little chat. You have to prepare. And God tells him how. "Take off your sandals, because the place where you are standing is holy ground. Take off your shoes. Remove anything from between you and the ground from whence you came, the ground to which you will go when your days are finished. Take them off and wiggle your toes in this sacred soil. Remember who made you and to whom you will return." And we hear the echo, "Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return." It's a reminder that I'd warrant we need much less now than we did 5 months ago. In the age of COVID, we're reminded daily, sometimes relentlessly, that we are frail and vulnerable human beings. This may be one of the biggest and best and life-altering lessons of this pandemic, if we decide to let it be. If we choose to remember, even once we're past this thing, that our lives are always and only a gift from God, who took we human beings from the soil and formed us into creatures meant to live in love, creatures formed of the earth, our mother, by love and for love. But here's another important thing about Moses being asked to stand with his toes wriggling in the holy, life-giving soil to which he will someday return. Something I learned from a biblical scholar, Anathea Portier-Young. The removal of your sandals by your own hand or someone else's occurs in multiple rites in the Hebrew scriptures, and the act signifies something extremely important. It makes null and void any previous legal and binding legal and social ties. When your shoes are removed, you're no longer bound by past alliances or connections. Your old commitments and promises are done away with. So you're now free, she says, to give yourself to new claims, new relationships, new responsibilities. That's precisely what God is calling Moses to do on this mountainside. Give over all of himself. Be claimed fully by the God who is calling his name. Take off your shoes, Moses, and start listening closely, because what you are about to hear will change everything. Will change you and will change history. You will set God's people free. But first, Moses demurs. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? He knows what misery is there, including his own. He's already a wanted man who has killed a soldier of the king. And God says, none of that matters. I will be with you, so that's who you are, that you should go to Pharaoh. In the words of David Lewis, this story is about a no-holds-barred encounter between a wily, even conniving outlaw and a God who's more than up to the challenge of transforming him into an instrument of salvation. Which means for all of us, I might add, that we're not likely to escape our callings either. God goes on to give Moses a sign that it really is God who is sending him. When your task is over and done, when my people are free, you will worship on this very mountain. You will come back to the place where you began. Moses has begun by questioning his own identity, and now he turns the question to this God in the burning bush. Luce describes it this way. Suppose I go to the Israelites and tell them all this great news and they're a tad skeptical, to the point of asking, just who is this God who sent me? What shall I tell them? It sounds like an innocent and reasonable enough question, except that it's not, says Luce. It's utterly and completely a power play, because names are pivotal, especially in their power to reveal the character of the person. Remember Jacob, literally named Heel, because he came out of the womb grasping his brother's heel and spent the rest of his life grasping everything else until God wrestled him to the ground and gave him a new name one night, Israel. Which is what's happening here. And I'll quote Luce again because he says it better than I could. Moses isn't asking for a calling card, he says. He's trying to wile the name out of this divine being, because to know its name is to have a certain power over it, which is what makes God's answer so perfect. I am who I am. How do you like them apples, Moses? God will have none of that wiliness. God will not be limited by a name. There are endless debates over exactly what the divine name means and how to best translate it. It's definitely in the present, I am who I am, something about beingness, but it also has a future cast to it. I will be who I will be, which means, Luce thinks, that what God is actually saying is that you can't really know who God is until you're willing to sign on for God's mission in the world. When Moses is finished with the enormous ministry to which God is calling him and is finally on the other end of things, back on this mountain, says Luce, he won't need to ask for God's name any longer because he's already learned firsthand through his own experience. And that makes me wonder, what if you and I took off our shoes right now? What if we remembered vividly that the earth is holy? What if we remembered that we were made to love, that we were made for love, and that our lives are meant for spending in love for others. Which is not, I think, unlike what is happening in our gospel reading from Matthew this morning. You might remember that last week, Peter was talking a good game, claiming his belief that Jesus was the Messiah. But in the verses we read today, he gets himself in trouble. And here's the reason. Because he can't imagine a Messiah who could end up suffering, or worse, dying. It's just not how he's ever understood the promises that God has made, the promises that Peter and so many of his fellow Israelites were counting on to set them free, to give them their own exodus, Moses-like, from the oppression of the Romans. It can't be like that, he cries. And then he gets the reply from Jesus that shocks all of us. Get behind me, Satan. I don't think it's so much that Jesus wants to call his friend a devil, but that he doesn't want Peter to tempt him away from what he knows he has to do. He doesn't want anything or anyone to stand in his way, to steer him off course. And then, of course, we get to the heart of what Jesus is saying here. If you want to become my followers, deny yourselves and take up your cross and follow me. All of us who know the end of the story knows just where that leads. It's just as Jesus told Peter and the others. Following Jesus will get you to the cross. Living the life that Jesus lived and wants to live in you will get you in trouble. The enemies of this way of life are legion, and they will kill you in a New York minute if they think you are endangering their power. Take up your cross and follow me. We've heard it so many times, and too often I think we hear it somehow as a kind of recipe for martyrdom. It's heart-wrenchingly true that physical martyrdom still happens. You just have to read the headlines. It happens to people of all kinds of faith, not just Christians. But unfortunately for us, I don't think this is what Jesus really means when he tells us to take up our cross. Because our brothers and sisters who faced martyrdom don't take up their crosses come to them. And what Jesus is basically saying to us is this: put yourself in harm's way. Go to where those in captivity need you still. Go to the places where people have lost hope. But the places where people have lost hope are never easy. They're not places we're naturally drawn to hanging out. Our survival instinct is too strong. But here's the thing. Our survival instinct heads us in the wrong direction. It ultimately leads us towards death, the spiritual sort, the kind that really matters and that Jesus is trying to tell us about. That's the wrong direction, says Jesus. I want you to have life, the kind that lasts, the kind that will, it's true, land you back in the sacred ground from which you and Moses and every human being were made. But it won't keep you there. It will give you new and unending life inside the life of the love who created you. We have to risk following Jesus by choice, going where our hearts might be faint, going where we might want to ask with Moses, who am I to be going to this place? I'm not sure I can handle this. But we will hear the words from the burning bush, the words that ring out from the end of Matthew's gospel, the place where all of his story of Jesus is heading. I will be with you, says the fiery bush. I will be with you, says the risen Christ, to the end of the ages. So go into all the world, taking the good news with you. This is not saying, go seek martyrdom. Far from it. There is nothing noble about seeking out suffering merely for the sake of suffering. That's the worst sort of twisting what the gospel of Jesus is all about. But it is saying, Real love costs. It often means sacrifice, means offering ourselves, giving up ourselves, our souls and bodies, for God to take and use in showing people who need hope, who need love, who need liberation, what the hope and love and liberation looks like in real, lived human lives. Here is what writer Ted Noffen has to say about this idea. The tragedy of Christianity has been that Christians have left it all to Jesus. Christians have never tired of seeing the spectacle of Christ himself upon the cross, as though we see him, Noffen says, as our stand-in or proxy representative in every age. We love to sing and pray and preach about the cross. But here's the kicker, which could be hard for us to hear, though nonetheless is absolutely true. He continues, as long as we are so fascinated and mesmerized, humanity troops to its doom. What will save the world is not Christ's suffering and death, but ours. It is not his blood which counts, but ours. It is not his broken body which matters, but ours. In fact, he says, this is what Christianity is all about. It concerns the followers of Christ, no less than it concerned Christ himself. They must be radically obedient to God, truth, and humanity. Noffen is saying, in short, that we Christians have never really done, at least on any large enough scale, what Jesus is asking of us this morning. Never really taken up our crosses and followed him. Because if we had, the world around us would be a very different place. It wouldn't mean, for example, that COVID and its ravages to the human body would not have come, but it might mean that far fewer people would be suffering from loneliness and isolation and hunger and the ravages that are the daily onslaughts of systemic racism. But Jesus is asking us again this morning, and each of us have a new chance to answer in a new way. Today, in fact, every day, because we are always offered new beginnings. We have our charge. It's straightforward and direct. The words are plain, the same on the face of them as they are underneath. Take up your cross, says Jesus, and follow me. Follow me to all the places where good trouble needs to go, as my former congressman and hero, John Lewis, might have put it. Follow me to all the places where someone is lonely, where entire peoples are oppressed, where hope is lacking, where fatigue is setting in. Go there, because when you see what your own self-offering can do, you will remember yourself why hope is real, why you ever believed in the first place, why you ever dared to speak up and say, here I am, or you are the Messiah. Because in a time like COVID, we need hope as much as any of those to whom we try to take it. And the amazing, miraculous truth that we're being called to remember this morning is that burning bushes are all around us, that any ground we're standing on is holy ground, that God says not only I am, but I will be always into the future in all the places that I call you. You may think yourself inadequate, but that's irrelevant. I'm adequate. Like Moses, you may not know exactly who I am now, but you'll learn more of me as you go. Like Moses, you don't know yet where the journey ahead is going to take you. But like Moses, all you have to do is say yes and take the first step. I don't usually like ending sermons with a prayer, but this one seems an awfully good place to close out these thoughts. I hope you'll join me. It comes from our brothers and sisters in the Evangelical Lutheran Church. O God, you have called your servants to ventures of which we cannot see the ending, by paths yet untrodden, through perils unknown. Give us faith to go out with good courage, not knowing where we go, but only that your hand is leading us and your love supporting us. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.